is good. All right, it's working. Awesome. So I am Madeleine Puschautz. I'm a board certified music therapist at Harmonic Changes, and I will be presenting on imposter syndrome and professionals and human services. Let's see if this is working here. All right, very good. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so my goal this evening is to provide a brief overview of imposter syndrome, how it exists, manifests, and I do not in any way wish to diagnose anyone, place anyone in a category, or have anyone feel the need to place themselves in a category. I would love for this to be an exploration of this topic and an opportunity for us to learn more about the complexities of being human. All right. I wonder, let me see if this is showing all of us. I'll just assume it's working. Okay, so let's dig in. So, imposter syndrome, I have a little abbreviation here, IS. It was first coined by psychologists Pauline R. Clance and Suzanne A. Imes in 1978 to describe an internal experience of intellectual phoniness in people who believe that they are not intelligent, capable, or creative despite evidence of high achievement. That despite evidence part is huge in this because it's really proving each individual wrong that they are competent and they are worthy of these positions that they hold. And these other quotes I received from Michelle Kerrigan from Michelle Kerrigan Incorporated in Consulting. And she states the notion that doing is the best antidote. When we're doing, we have no time to criticize ourselves. So that's active, keeping busy, staying busy. And this last quote really touches on how those with IS tend to forget about the perspective, and perspective really matters, and that evidence really matters. So this states, we often devalue the positive impact we have on others. If it was someone else's life, we could see it objectively. It took me a long time to see the value I brought to many companies and clients. I finally realized that if I saw someone else who had my career, I would think, wow, that's terrific. And now I do. So I think to some level, we can all kind of relate to that sentiment. Not to say that is exclusive of imposter syndrome, but throughout this presentation, you may relate to certain aspects of it, and that's okay. It's this wide spectrum. So I have a little visual break for us, for the visual learners. Full honesty, this is my cat Honeybee, and we have this picture on the left of Honeybee really displaying a confident aura, fearless aura, stylish fashionista aura, and so this is the projected image. And then to the right, this is the imposter syndrome inner fraud brought to light here. So you can really see the intense fear in her eyes, the fear of being found out, which we'll talk a little bit more about with some symptoms of imposter syndrome. So what do these include? Arlen Sunsik, in her article entitled, "What is Imposter Syndrome?" she speaks about this chronic self-doubt that those with IS experience, this sense of intellectual fraudulence, such as not feeling competent or successful, inability to internalize accomplishments, despite the level of success in field, that's that evidence or training experience, being very, very berating to your performance, always having that cap of judgment on very harshly with yourself, fear that you won't live up to expectations, that overachieving, often seek trying to be that perfectionist and overachieve, sabotaging your own success, excuse me. So that's related to setting these extremely lofty goals and then not being able to complete them. So that really sabotages what you set out to do. All right. Feeling disappointed when you fall short. So I have a little bit of a quiz time. So for our lucky participant, true or false, high achieving and highly successful people hardly ever suffer from imposter syndrome. All right, you can go ahead and type it in the chat box if you would like. True or false, T or F. Possibly. I'll have some Jeopardy music. All right. Our guess says true. So, brand reveal. Let's go back here. False. Nice try. Thank you for providing an answer. But high achieving and highly successful people often suffer from imposter syndrome because there is that really strong link with perfectionism, particularly with women and academics. This is also provided in Soonsik's article. But it's also estimated that 70% of people will experience at least one episode of IS in their lives. So that relates to maybe starting a new job, maybe starting new personal roles, such as a parent and feeling unqualified to do that. That's really linked with that. And just to clarify from the get-go, if you identify with this, there's definitely nothing wrong with you. IS has really, really strong roots in family labels, societal issues, biases, racism, classism, and a lot more that we'll dig into. So no one is alone in this, and it's definitely not accountable for the individual. So now that we have a little bit of an inkling about that, let's move on to the origin story of imposter syndrome. Cue the DC or Marvel movie about imposter syndrome. If it was a superhero, what would it look like? All right, so imposter syndrome. It was coined by these two female psychologists in 1978. Although, right from the get-go, I'm going to disclose that there was a lot of lacking in the original discovery of it and lots of the groups and the studies based around it. As evidenced in Tol Cheyenne and Jodi A. Burry's Harvard Business Review article entitled "Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome." But they point out that at the time, the term did not include the severe impact of systemic racism, classism, which is class discrimination, xenophobia, which is that prejudice against people from other countries, and other biases. They also disclosed that many groups were excluded from the study. Go figure, namely women of color and people of various income levels and genders and professional backgrounds. So really, really lacking in this. And then there's a quote here that we touched on a little bit, but we'll go further in depth with that as well. But IS puts the blame on individuals without accounting for the historical and cultural contexts that are foundational in how it manifests. Not only manifests, but really how it keeps going through this perpetual cycle. These factors you'll find that's just what perpetuates imposter syndrome. So there's a few more parts to this origin story. Corkindale identifies different roots in the labels that parents attach to children, such as, you may have heard of these, like the sensitive one, intelligent one, the obstinate one, rebellious one, the like promised child, all those different labels. So the theory is that parents can program the child with messages of superiority. Therefore, this creates this effect that the child is fully supported, so that both parents and the child believe that she is superior or perfect. That's just one of the theories. And in the Orbe Austin's book, which is entitled Own Your Own Greatness, they really emphasize this point, but they say that although it's prevalent in white families, it's really exasperated in BIPOC families by experiences of oppression and or immigration, where they often stem from a need to survive and the belief that no one is going to roll out the red carpet for us. Just to be clear, BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. And this is referred to in the book as well. All right, and they also say IS is not innate, but learned, however deeply ingrained it might seem, which is encouraging. It means that although systemic racism might bolster these feelings of fraudulence in us BIPOC, we also have the power to unlearn them too. All right. Origin story, kind of complete. Let's move on to some common thoughts and feelings associated with IS. You have this feeling of being under pressure, this feeling of I must not fail, a huge amount of pressure to avoid being found out. Like we saw my cat Honeybee with the fear in her eyes of being unmasked. Also feeling like a fake, fear of being like someone made a mistake to appoint you a position, that you are in the role you're in, that you are assigned to the assignments that you're in. It's all down to luck. So really attributing success to external reasons. So that's whether luck, by chance, by people, really downplaying it as well, which pulls in the next one. Success is no big deal. Downplaying your success and difficulty accepting compliments. So now that we have some kind of common thoughts and feelings associated with imposter syndrome, I have a little game for us to play as well. So we had a little quiz time. Now we have a little guess who said it. And these are very well-known individuals in film, in, in literature. So I will go ahead and go one by one with these quotes. We have our initials here, so you can take a guess at what those are. We have the chat box open if you want to take a guess. Our very first one is, I still doubt myself every single day. What people believe is my self-confidence is actually my reaction to fear. This is WS. Who said it? Give a little bit of time if you want to take a guess. If not, that's okay. Don't want to give it too much pressure. Okay, we'll go ahead and reveal it. Dun, 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 dun. Will Smith. Yes, you know him in Men in Black, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Pursuit of Happiness, 7 Pounds. There's so many pictures that he is in. He's award-winning rapper as well and producer. Very, very successful, very well-known, and still has those very relatable feelings. And these are very common. as well. Let's go on to our next quote. You think, why would anyone want to see me again in a movie? And I don't know how to act anyway, so why am I doing this? This is by MS. We have some context clues here. MS. The context clue is in a movie there. So we know this might be an actress. Do you want to take any guesses? Okay, let's reveal the answer. Meryl Streep. Yes. All right. So she has been nominated for Academy Award 21 times, has won it 3 times. You know her from Devil Wears Prada, Mamma Mia, Julie and Julia, so many others. I just think it's fascinating that she would say, who wants to see her in a movie? It's really bananas to me. But this is the complexity of being human and the complexity of imposter syndrome. All right, so last one here. I have written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find out now, I run a game on everybody, and they're going to find me out. Yeah, this really plays into that inner complex of, yikes, I have this mask over me, and I don't want to be found out that I am less competent. Who said it? We have an author this time. Here's a hint. She's very famous for her work. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. It's the first of her 6 autobiographies. And we'll reveal it in 3, 2, 1. Maya Angelou. Yes, and I love this picture of her. Her smile is so vibrant. She looks so happy. But yeah, she's an acclaimed American poet, storyteller, activist, autobiographer, very broad career, first female Black director in Hollywood, very well known as a writer, editor, essayist, playwright, and poet, and huge part in the civil rights movement, working for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. She was awarded over 50 honorary degrees before her death in 2014 at the age of 86. So, thank you for playing that game with me or holding on while we revealed those answers. So now that we have some glimpses of very well individuals who have suffered from IS, let's talk about some factors that contribute to IS. We have these 4 factors, and you'll very quickly see that they overlap in a lot of different ways. They pull into each other, etc. So let's dive into social. Of course, we have a masked picture as well. All right, so starting with the social factor, since humans are naturally social beings, I included a quote from Jolie A. Doggett from her HuffPost article entitled, IS Hits Harder When You're Black. She states, it's the feeling that you don't belong here, wherever here is for you, the office, your friend group, the classroom, or the boardroom. And in her article, she lists some really pertinent information, and she speaks really about not being able to see other people that look like her in the workplace, and how that's really affected her role within the workplace and her work experience in general. And this other information is from Soon Sik, and she lists that she states a lot about how IS and social anxiety may overlap. and how the symptoms of social anxiety can fuel feelings of IS and vice versa, and how IS can usually cause normally non-anxious people to experience a sense of anxiety in situations where they feel inadequate. So she lists some examples, such as conversation with someone, and being overwhelmed with that fear that, oh, they're going to find out that you're wearing this mask with this cover that you are better than you really are. With presentations, having a tendency to play into this type of IS called the perfectionist. So in which you're really never satisfied with your work and believe that it could always be better. Social media, of course, plays a huge role in how people really keep up their presentation and keep that mask up over social media. And pursuing higher education is really kind of this double-edged sword of, you may feel inadequate to even pursue higher education if you suffer from IS, or if you do pursue higher education because of IS, you are likely to set these really lofty goals for yourself and then often feel devastated when you're unable to meet them. So those are some social factors, which, of course, play into our next one. Let's get personal. Here we have in Jane Leonard's article, she has an article in Medical News Today. She speaks about this how success can be a cycle of doubt for those with IS, in the way that they have this inability to recognize their own accomplishments despite evidence to speak otherwise. And other personal factors may be human giver syndrome that can play a lot into it. And this is identified as moral obligation to give their humanity to other human beings. And this is a prime recipe for burnout. And what do you know? It's most common in women. There's a lot more information on human giver syndrome and burnout in the Nagoski sisters' book, Burnout, go figure, released in 2019. But they speak a little bit about burnout too, which, well, heavily about burnout. That's the title of the book, because it was first coined as this technical term by Herbert Freudenberg in 1975, and they identify those three components: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, this decreased sense of accomplishment. And there are some pretty stunning statistics from burnout as well, which that it affects 20 to 30% of teachers in America each year, and 52% of medical professionals. As you can see, those professionals that really deal with a lot of people each day, how heavily that plays into this as well. And for all my music therapy colleagues out there, there's a really great article by Clemens Cortez that talks about factors contributing to burnout for music therapists. And in this article, she goes into great deal about these different factors, such as work being more organizational, actually, rather than personal. But the stress with your professional workload, your role, poor salaries, the social element being lack of support and control, isolation, and degree of contact with other MTs. For those MTs that are more independent contractors, this can be a really, really hard thing to do. And to not have that in-person interaction and that support can be very difficult. All right, and then for individual factors, as a healthcare profession, you may fall into the category of being more of a provider of care rather than a care receiver. So that kind of element of pouring from your glass and trying not to run dry of that care. So now that we have some personal factors, let's move on to the cultural. So this picture on the right is Dr. Lisa Orbe-Austin, who I have referred to already throughout this, but she has this great book that she co-authored with her husband on imposter syndrome. And she's also quoted a lot in this article from Pandika as well. And they list, well, the mutual understanding from the article is that navigating IS as a BIPOC can be especially thorny, a little tricky. And there's some really great quotes from the Orbe-Austins that say, you experience the imposter syndrome internally, but externally you're also told by systemic oppression and racism that you don't belong, that you're a fraud. And this one also emphasizes that internal as well as external reasons for it. But as you're trying to convince yourself that you're not an imposter, the world is telling you that you are an imposter. I also included some information from Jolie A. Doggett, and she states, IS and racial discrimination work hand in hand to tear down our self-esteem and mental health. She talks about how IS can really add to the stress that minorities already feel, and the statistic that African Americans are 20% more likely than the general population to experience a mental health problem. And that being said, that they're also least likely to receive diagnoses or treatment, which that kind of pulls into imposter syndrome is not included in the DSM-5, not a typical diagnosis. It's more kind of similar like to a phenomenon, I would say. But let's go ahead and move on to, not to understate the effects of it, but it's not included in that as of yet. Moving on to our last factor, work. Let's talk about work. All right. This image is also great with the Medusa heads. I know a lot of music therapists often think they wish they had that many arms and hands so they can play, they can prompt, they can keep track of data. So there's, this is such a funny image, I think. So for work, I compiled this sort of flow chart from Jane Leonard's article. And she has an article from Medical News Today, but it talks about how IS really affects lots of components of our work performance environment and can really greatly impact our own uniqueness as workers as well. As we read a little bit about from Jolie A. Doggett, how she said there's no one that she doesn't really identify with anyone in the office. So when you don't really identify, you may kind of fall into that role of fitting in more than kind of showing off that own uniqueness, which is very unfortunate. So this talks about, you'll see how these spiral down into each other. But it affects our work performance with fears that colleagues and supervisors expect more than they can manage, and the fear of not being able to succeed on tasks. This being said, the person with IS may limit their tasks because they're afraid of compromising what they have already assigned. And this spirals down into a fear and being able to deliver, and may cause someone to hold themselves back, avoid seeking higher achievements, which increases a self-doubt in a person and further emphasizes this really warped cycle of inability to do something just for fear that it won't be good enough. So you can really see how the work is at this forefront, but it trickles down into that social element and that personal element and mental health element of it too. Yeah, lots of interesting stuff here with these factors. So now that we've talked about those factors, let's talk about the manifestation of it, which we already alluded to a little bit. So we'll kind of just review these. With work performance, we saw how it affects our ability to, or our tendency to take on additional responsibilities with that fear of not being able to succeed. This increases that self-doubt again. And with a person with IS, if they do take on responsibilities and do achieve some level of success, they tend to attribute it to those external factors, such as, oh, I received so much help on this, or, oh, I just got really lucky, as all opposed to, oh, I worked so hard on this, I worked hours on this, or I trained for this for weeks, or I have this specific skill set because I practiced and I trained for this. This creates job dissatisfaction and burnout, because when you wear down when you increase your self-doubt and you wear down how many responsibilities you have, you're at this kind of compliant level, and you're not going to your full potential. So that can really create a lot of job dissatisfaction. And if you're a human giver, you might be pouring out from an empty cup, and that often leads to burnout. So this, again, leads to not seeking more, such as promotions, higher pay, better suited assignments as well can relate to that. If you have a specific interest or professional development goals, which definitely relates and impacts your mental health, and setting these really high and unrealistic goals. So we spoke about all that heavy stuff with all those factors. Let's go a little bit. We're working through that tunnel, hoping to get to that light at the end of the tunnel. So let's talk about those ways to reduce the effects of imposter syndrome. All right, so the Orbe-Austins and Pandika, they really highlight the importance of building a sense of connection to who you are. So that's finding a community of people whose racial identity is similar to yours. And it's one of the most important factors in recovering from IS if you are a Black, Indigenous, or person of color. It's huge. They talk about valuing self-care, broadening the roles you play, because being wary of that comfort zone and being able to take in some more responsibilities, because chances are, and not just chances, but skills and that evidence say that you are capable of doing so. And reminding yourself of your own achievements. This can be in a lot of different ways, but if you like to keep a file, if you like to journal, there are some online sources where you can write yourself a letter in X amount of months or weeks or whatnot, called futureme.org, but you're able to even write yourself a letter of your own achievements if you would like to do that route as well. Just a little personal motivator. In Corkindale's article, she speaks about, in her Harvard Business Review article, she speaks about recognizing imposter feelings when they emerge, which I know can be very, very difficult, and that definitely takes practice. But again, she really plays on the part of talking about your feelings. And oftentimes when you say your feelings out loud, you recognize things as you are saying them. So that could be a really good practice in recognizing those feelings and identifying them and practicing reframing them as well, which we will touch on in the next slide. And she has this idea of rewriting your mental programs. So just thinking of those computations in your brain and not attributing things that you have been successful in as just a pure result of external factors. Of course, there is some level of external factors in there, such as maybe you did have someone really help you with something, but that's not to say that it minimizes any of the skill sets that you have or the education or training that you have. And this last point over here talks about this 42% percentage of that scientists really say you need this percent of rest in order just to get adequate rest. So this is about 10 hours a day, and this is a percentage of time your body and your brain really, really need in order to really be yourself, honestly. So this rest, you may ask, what is rest? This includes sleep, that social connection element, exercise, food, which includes about like preparing and eating food, and a wild card activity. So if you need a little bit more sleep, maybe that's part of your wild card activity. If you play in a band, that could be your wild card activity. There's lots of different groups you may be a part of as well, which can play a little bit of in each of those as well. And I do realize that this may seem outrageous and impossible, but in the Burnout book by the Nagoski, they're actually identical twin sisters, which is really cool. But they have a pie chart in the chapter that has an example of a typical American woman who has a spouse. She has 2 children and she works full-time. And they factor in what her typical schedule would look like, and they budget it out, and it really works. So not to say that this will be easy, particularly because we live in a world and a society that makes prioritizing sleep really difficult. And also because most women who suffer from human giver syndrome also may feel really guilty for sleeping, because it's that's what you need. So it's you as opposed to caring for others. But the payoff of spending more time resting is that during the remaining 58% of your life, you feel more energized, focused, creative, nicer to be around. How many of us have been really crabby when they have not had sleep or rest, proper rest, and less likely to make mistakes and really more likely to enjoy what you're doing, which is a huge, huge part of life. I know a lot of people, everyone's looking for those key elements of happiness. So that can be one part of the recipe for that happiness step. So back to that little cat theme. This visual is funny, but you have this lioness over here looking in a mirror and just seeing a little domestic house cat with this wig of a mane saying, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, am I worthy of this all?" And this may be your internal frame as well. And to this, I say yes. You are worthy, you are competent, you are deserving, skilled, trained, intelligent, And just a reminder, friendly reminder that you are not, you're not meant to know everything. So, and it's not normal to know everything either. And ways to just find ways to reframe failure as a learning opportunity. I know during if you do fail something, it sucks and it can be very, very difficult. And oftentimes years later, you are able to reframe it. But if we work on kind of rewriting those mental programs, as Corkindale stated, it can be a lot easier to realize all the potential from failing something and how much more you can learn from that as well. And lastly, consider how your imposter syndrome took its shape, its origin story. As we spoke about, it's not an individual problem. It's not because there's something wrong with you. So this is huge because you have to take into account all those different factors. And as you saw, they really play into each other and overlap. So it's extremely important to consider those. So we've reached our conclusion. All right. I love this quote from Tolshan and Burry. In their Harvard Business Review article, their article is called Stop Telling Women They Have IS, which I think is great as well. Really good article. But this quote is awesome. It says, "The answer to overcoming IS is not to fix individuals, but to create an environment that fosters a variety of leadership styles and in which diverse racial, ethnic, and gender entities are seen as just as professional as the current model, which Opie describes as usually this Eurocentric, masculine, and heteronormative, that sort of model." So this just plays into and reiterates that fact that IS is not an individual's issue, and that we can help those who suffer from IS by fostering a much more inclusive and diverse environment. And just an aside, Opie, you may be like, who is Opie? They refer to Tina Opie, and she is an associate professor at Babson College, just so you have that reference in that quote. And they also highlight that it's crucial to fix bias and not women. This really calls for leaders to create a culture culture for women and people of color that addresses systemic racism and bias. And in this way, we can help channel healthy self-doubt, because there's some level of it that's healthy, but channel that into positive motivation, which is best fostered in a supportive work environment. So you see those really, all those factors that we spoke about, how they pool into each other, how much they contribute and perpetuate imposter syndrome, is the solution for combating this cycle of imposter syndrome. All right. And lastly, I really enjoy this quote from Jolie A. Doggett. She states so simply and beautifully, "You are capable, you are talented, and you belong." Simple as that. Here are some resources. After the conclusion, here are some resources. If you need some, there are local networks, whether that's in person, which there might be some in person if you have some groups that you are part of. Usually social media has a ton as well, and that doesn't limit where you are geographically, which can be really helpful too. For example, our CEO, Melissa Summers, created a Chicago-based music therapy group on Facebook, which helps us stay connected despite being having more of those independent contractor roles and being able to pool resources together seek feedback and some level of supervision over social media, which is really great. So I encourage you to find your group as well, find that level of support and connection. And throughout my presentation, I included some of these books, which I think are amazing. I have them. Well, I have 2 out of the 3 of these over right next to me. But Own Your Own Greatness is over here. Overcoming Imposter Syndrome by Dr. Lisa Orbay-Austin and Dr. Richard Orbay-Austin. Power Couple. It's more of a workbook too, so that can be really great and really validating for if you need that physical element of writing out things. Confessions from Your Token Black Colleague is a really great source as well, from Talisa or Tali Lavari. And then I also reference Burnout, which mine is completely tabbed up. But this is great for unlocking the stress cycle, going through those different emotions, talking about different societal issues and how that pulls into burnout as well. And that focus that these issues, these reoccurring things are not because us as individuals are running short of something, but lots of times it has roots in other factors. And lastly, maybe most important, but connect and talk to someone. Whether that's a professional therapist, which I know is not always easy regarding financially, or it's a process of finding the right fit too. But that's very, very helpful and beneficial. And I know there's lots of different ways to receive it now as well, such as having being able to like text your therapist, not having to go to a physical place, whatever works best for you. But if you're not able to do that, seeking some help and some guidance or support from your colleagues that understand your work environment too, and friends, of course, and family. I didn't include family, but family could definitely be a great resource as well. All right. Here are my references. I apologize, the font is kind of small. I wanted to fit it all in one, just on one slide. So there they are. Okay. All right. We've reached the questions part. You can ask me now, or if you are someone who likes to let ideas simmer in your brain for a little bit, you can definitely ask me and email me at madeline.p@harmonicchanges.com, and I'll do my best to answer those. Okay, and thank you. Thanks so much for joining. I really love this. Thank you for that, ZDW. I love this visual, nice little gimmick here. But I really appreciate your time and attention, whether you're watching this live or watching this virtually with the recording. Thank you for this. I know it's can be a very heavy topic, so thank you for sticking with me. And please remember to be kind to yourself. We're in this together. We can help combat these symptoms of IS if you suffer from IS together, and help to be better. If you don't suffer from IS, help to be more empathetic to those who do. All right, here's our social media. If you aren't following us, we've got Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Check us out. And here's some contact information. If you have any specific questions related to music therapy services, events, resources, we have a lot of free resources on our site, as well as different